I am going to be referring very closely to what JadeFire made me write today, when, as usual, I sat to connect, to ask if there's anything particular that I needed to focus upon. And he made me write quite a bit, which I am going to very closely refer to today. So, all of us know that there are wars happening all around the world, whether we are looking at the East with Cambodia and Thailand, whether we are looking at Dubai, Iraq, Iran, USA, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan. There are wars happening all over the globe almost. The venues are different. The battlefields may be different. The suffering seems to be the same everywhere for all persons. And whatever and wherever the arenas might be, the commonality is that there is division, there is fear. And with all of this, there are very strong opinions. And I'm sure you and I too fall under this. There are very, very strong opinions of right and wrong and forgivable and not forgivable and all the rest of it. The wars seem to be bringing out in us some very, very strong emotions. And I have been monitoring my emotions. I have been very conscious of my reactions. And then I sit and I reflect over what really is making me emote so strongly, react so emphatically. And whether we are directly affected by the war or not. And by divine grace, at present, a large number of us gathered here in this session, we are not that closely affected by any of the wars. But the distance doesn't seem to be mattering. There seems to be a collective energy, or something in the collective energy field that is distinctly feeling unsettled. You know, and I know, that there is an inner, a deeper root to any conflict that we encounter or experience in the world around us. And probably there is very little that I will say today that you may not really be aware of. But the very fact that JadeFire thought it important enough to make me write this, to urge me to talk about this, means that whether we know this intelligently or not, this needs to be spoken. This needs to be heard. This needs to be internalized and reflected upon. So we come to the topic for today. What is the spiritual root of conflict? More importantly, where within us is this spiritual root? Because the truth is, if we do not change one by one, if we continue to talk of others in blame, if we continue to ask questions which really at the root of the questions is nothing else but blame, the division will never disappear. And if it doesn't disappear within, it cannot disappear outside of us. And when I understand this in the light of the energies, the crystalline energies of 2026, I get a little perturbed. Why perturbed? Because I know that the crystalline energies are amplifiers. And if, in spite of all our awareness, these wars, which so clearly are catalysts, if these wars bring up these strong emotions, they are doing this in order to draw our attention to that spiritual root that lies within us. JadeFire started the writing with, it is the easiest thing to look at war as out there. That's his first line. It is very easy to consider war as out there, to consider it as nations fighting, as egos clashing, as ideologies colliding. Very, very easy. But spiritually speaking, outer conflict is always an amplification of inner conflict. I have underlined this. War does not begin on battlefields. War begins in consciousness. And I'd like you to take a moment to think about this statement. War does not begin on battlefields, it begins in consciousness. Whose consciousness? Are we again going to say it's the consciousness of those people who are fighting the wars? Because if you do that, if you say it's the consciousness of another, then you haven't understood what consciousness is. Because consciousness is not about hers and his and mine. It's our consciousness. It's a collective field of consciousness. And that is where war begins, in that collective field of consciousness. Conflict is born in that moment when we move into separation. We may not even be aware of it. But as soon as we say or we think, I am right, she is wrong, this is good, this is bad, these words, these thoughts come out of separation. We are so used to thinking in this manner, we are so used to speaking in this manner, that we do not even realize that they are all coming out of separation. And as soon as we move into separation, in that very moment, conflict takes birth. So JF says the consciousness of separation is the seed of violence. And it does not start at the level of governments. It starts in the human ego. We have been speaking continually over the past several weeks about 2026 and the energies of 2026 being the energies of coherence and alignment, unity with the energies of spirit. We have also been speaking of the planets and how the planets are perfectly poised for collapse. They're perfectly poised to encourage, to abet the collapse of structures around us, structures that are based in our ego. But once again, we cannot here make it easy for ourselves and say, oh, those are those big structures. I am not a part of that. Those are political structures. Those are financial structures. Those are economic structures. They have nothing to do with me. They do. Because the consciousness of separation that lies in the ego is again a collective field. There is no consciousness that can be divided and said, this is the consciousness of those politicians, and this is the consciousness of finance organizations. It has nothing to do with me. Your consciousness, your separation consciousness, my separation consciousness, which begins in my ego, which begins in your ego, forms a collective field. And that is why GF says war does not begin at the level of governments. It begins here. And this may be a truth that we may not want to hear, or we may find it difficult to comprehend. But if we find it difficult to comprehend, it doesn't mean we trash it. It means we have to sit with it and we have to understand it, and we have to deepen our powers of comprehension. Because if you are here today listening to this talk, if you are part of this very vital discussion, it means that you are in full awareness of this truth. You are just hearing it out loud so that your soul can say, hey, this is what I have been trying to remind you of. JF goes on to say that the ego survives through division. I found that powerful. For the ego to survive, it needs separation. So it needs you to think of me as separate from you. It needs you to think of your community as separate from another community. It needs you to think of your world as separate from his world or her world or their reality. It survives on division. It strengthens itself through comparison. Wow. I just sat for a moment silent at this. And I realized how strongly in the past few days, or rather in the past few weeks, with everything going on in the world around me, I realized how I have been comparing. I've been comparing one leader to another, one country to another, these groups of people with these groups of people. And I admitted to myself, I was not living in coherence. My energies were in alignment with my ego, not with spirit. Because every time I compared, my ego got stronger. And as my ego got stronger, the comparisons grew more strong as well. So the ego survives on division, strengthens itself through comparison. And now, here the last one, feels secure when it has an enemy. Wow. For all of us, for all human beings, fear and insecurity is a commonality that we all share. Yes, your insecurities may be different from my insecurities, but that is only banding for words. Insecurity is insecurity. And the way we attempt to bolster ourselves up, to give ourselves a false sense of security, we require an enemy. And suddenly I realized why it is so difficult to stop blaming. Because I realized enemy doesn't always mean the one who is holding a gun. Enemy doesn't always mean the one who is abusive. Enemy means anyone whom we blame, anyone whom we resent. And let's sit back and think about this a little deeper. If enemy is anyone whom we blame, is anyone whom we resent, is it not true then that the enemy also lives in our homes? I'm just putting it out there. Would you honestly be able to say that you have never blamed anyone in your close family circle? You have never resented anyone in your close family circle? Let us not even go outside our homes. For the present, let's just be in our homes. The enemy is in the home. And the reason we find it so difficult to stop blaming, we find it so difficult to take responsibility, even though everything that we have learned spiritually urges us to be responsible for our thoughts, our words, our actions. In spite of that, there is blame, there is bitterness. The ego needs an enemy to stay secure. So then I asked a question. I said, how do I, or where do I rather, where do I really create the enemies? Do I create them first internally and then externally, or do I create them externally and then internally? And of course, JadeFire said, you already know that answer. You create them internally first. The enemy is not only in your home. Of course, there are enemies outside your home. But the enemy is not only in your home, the enemy is inside of you. That is where the conflict is. And these are a few enemies that he pointed out. You live in subtle inner war at all times. You fight parts of yourself. The part that feels afraid, which you may not acknowledge, but attempt to silence. You fight that part. The part that feels angry, instead of recognizing that anger, and without any shame, acknowledging that anger and taking responsibility and owning that anger, you fight that by making the other person the enemy, the person you blame. You fight that part of you that feels unworthy. And instead of understanding why there is lack of self-worth, why there is this need for validation, which then brings you disappointment, which then leads to further blame. Instead of that, instead of sitting with that unworthiness, and understanding it and embracing it and looking deeper into it, we look for the enemy. We fight that part within us that needs to control. And here, JF said a personal message to me. He says, I am not referring this only to you, my beloved one. There is no human being, not even that human being that you might consider to be very timid. There is no human being that does not want control. And that part is the part that lives enmeshed in insecurity. That is the part of the ego that seeks to have even a pretense of security. Even the pretense of security is tolerable to feeling insecure. And that part of you that feels powerless because you have not tapped into the fullness of your spirit, because your life is still lived in coherence with the ego instead of coherence with spirit. These are the enemies that live within us. These are the parts of our own humanity that we desire to reject. And till as long as we reject them, till as long as we put on a show for the world, and your show and mask and disguise may be entirely different from mine, but till as long as we continue to reject those parts of our own humanity, we shall continue to put on the shows, and we shall continue to live as per the direction of the ego that survives on division, strengthens itself through comparison, and feels secure when it has an enemy. And then, of course, the truth is, whatever we reject internally, we project externally. We know that. We know that already. That is why I said earlier on that I very much doubt there is anything that I shall say today which you don't already know. But it is something that all of us need to hear. And this time, let us hear it with every cell of our being rather than just these 2 years. Let us truly internalize it, because if we don't, the wars cannot end. 2026 shall take this collective field of consciousness and shall amplify it. There are a few lines I have highlighted here. If I am at war with my own vulnerability, I will attack the vulnerability in others. These are lines that I wrote and then highlighted. Because as I was sitting and pondering over what had been written, this was something that came so strongly from deep within me. If I am at war with my own vulnerability, I will attack the vulnerability in others. What is within me shall be projected externally and then becomes part of the consciousness. And then at the levels of government, my war with my vulnerability becomes the war that governments fight, attacking the vulnerability of other nations. If I am at war with my own fear, I will condemn the fear and the actions that arise out of fear in another. What else is war if not fear? What else is war if not actions arising out of fear? And I saw this. I saw this today. If I am at war with my own fear, I will condemn the fear and the actions arising out of fear in others. If I am at war with uncertainty within myself, I will crave for rigid positions and black and white answers. This is right. This is wrong. There are no shades of gray then. And then you stay rigidly to that position. This country is wrong. This country is right. The true battle is the battle, the war that you fight within with your own uncertainty. And in order to allay the uncertainty within, we project onto the world rigid positions and absolute answers, black and white, yes and no, good and bad, right and wrong, nothing in between. JF then wrote this: conflict spiritually is an unintegrated shadow. You and I have been working upon our shadows, our karmic templates that are such huge shadows, which we have to understand deeper. Those of you who have done that very deep class with me on karmic templates, and I know so many of you are still working, and thank you for being so sincere, working with those deep meditations to erase the karmic templates from the chakric system. These are the shadows. And till those shadows are, as JF says, unintegrated, which means they have not been integrated into the spirit energy. They are still separate from the spirit energy. They're still being ruled by the egoic energy. Till as long as there is unintegrated shadow energy within us, there is going to be conflict within us, which is going to be projected outside. When shadow is not acknowledged, it looks for an outlet. Let's understand this. When I don't acknowledge the shadow that lives within me, my soul, my spirit, that desires me to look at that shadow so that I can become aware of it, so that I can recognize and acknowledge it, so that I can then integrate it into my soul energy. What my spirit will then do is look for an outlet which can mirror that shadow for me. But then what do we go and do? We blame that outlet. That outlet becomes our enemy and gives us that false sense of security, that false sense of being right. Oh, I have heard so many people who can talk for hours on end, telling a room full of people how right they are and how wrong someone else is. Why? Why do they need to do that? Because their own shadow energy has not been integrated into their spirit. Collectively, that outlet then is seen as division, aggression, domination, and war. Each one of us has an outlet. When each one of us has an outlet, it becomes a collective consciousness. And that collective consciousness becomes division, aggression, domination, war. And all because we did not address the shadow energy within us. So, what do we do in times of war? JadeFire has a very, very simple answer. I thought he would say, choose peace, choose love. He said nothing of that sort. He said, choose integration. Choose integration, the integration of the shadow energy with your spirit. Then he moved to not another topic, but he kind of changed the angle of his sharing. And he said, let's look at war from another angle now. Before healing any shadow, before healing any shadow, you must be ready for it to surface. In the human world, that is the only way that a shadow can heal. You must be ready for the shadow to surface. If the ego is so caught in the fear of the shadow, in the insecurity that the shadow brings, as soon as the shadow surfaces, it asks, it demands an outlet, an enemy. someone or something to blame. So we have to understand that before complete healing, the shadow will surface. Before integration, the distortion within becomes very visible, becomes so visible that it is impossible to deny it. You see, you and I have been denying the distortion each time it arose. We've kind of pushed it down, we've blamed others, we've looked for our outlets, we've looked for our enemies. We have to allow the distortion to become very emphatic. And he says the wars that are being fought today are the visibility, the undeniable visibility of the distortion. What you are witnessing globally today is the exposure of the distortions of old structures, old power structures, old karmic structures, old systems built on domination and division rather than unity and coherence. And the planets that we spoke of in an earlier discussion, those planets are aligned perfectly to expose the distortions. But we cannot fool ourselves into thinking that they are only exposing the power structures outside, the karmic patterns outside, the control structures outside. They are exposing the distortions within us. What is unconscious must become conscious. Only then can it dissolve. So instead of asking, why is this happening? JadeFire says, ask, what is being revealed of me, not to me? What is being revealed of me? We may feel powerless. We may feel overwhelmed by this information. But in those moments, we have to remember that the consciousness of spirit, the divine consciousness of which we are a part, that collective field that unites us all, is anything but powerless. It is so powerful. It is so glorious, so magnificently strong. We have to learn, train ourselves, discipline ourselves to willfully, moment to moment, live in that consciousness, to live in that collective field that is power itself. You don't have to do anything to feel powerful. It is power itself. So he ends with peace is not passive. Peace is disciplined awareness. Peace is refusing to let your fear make you hate. Because the only reason you hate another is because there is fear within you. Peace is integrating your own shadow so that it doesn't spill its energies outside. So before we end, I want you to join me in a very, very short 2-minute breathing. Close your eyes. Place one hand over your heart. Take a very slow breath in through your nose. Slowly release it through your mouth. And do this again. Slow breath in through your nose. Slow breath out through your mouth. And continue with this breathing and just become aware where in your body does the root of your conflict live. The physical body gives us all our answers. Where in your physical body does the root of the conflict live? Just become aware of it. Don't judge it. Don't try to fix it. Just become aware of it. Do not deny it. This is the place your body wants you to heal first. This is that part of you that is insisting that you must be right. This is that part of you that is afraid. This is that part of you that wants control. Do not fight these parts. Just say to them, I see you. We belong to spirit. And as you breathe, repeat it to yourself. May I be a field of integration. May I reduce division within me. May I live in coherence with my spirit. And may this truth integrate within me. Thank you for being here.